family unity. If you create family unity, you will inevitably have a better business. And if you preserve your family unity, you will undoubtedly have the opportunity of creating a longer-term business. If you remember in Aesop's fable of the bundle of sticks, you know, if you take a bundle of sticks and you pull one out, you can break it. But if you tie the bundle together, you can't. There's a wonderful family in India called the Chandaria family, where they have about 30 family members working in the business. They've got 600 companies in about 100 different countries. And they are one of the most successful fourth-generation Indian families. And they have a very simple philosophy. They use the hand to demonstrate who they are and what they stand for. And what it means is that if you look at somebody's hand, the fingers are all different lengths. Some stronger, some bigger, some thinner, some smaller. And what the Chandaryas say is that we're like a hand. We're all different, we all have different strengths and weaknesses, but when we do that, we're strong. So they respect all of the members of their family for who they are and where they are on that order of things. And I think there was a very simple lesson there in how to stay unified. But unfortunately, conflict and problems are normal in a family business. And if there are issues, if there are problems within the family, there are going to be problems in the business. And if there are problems in the business, things get into trouble. So you have to take care of the family and you have to take care of the business. And sometimes it's quite difficult. I said differences were inevitable. And this is from a constitution. This is somebody's protocol for managing differences. And in their protocol it says differences are inevitable, therefore it's important to accept and commit to manage and sort out differences quickly. So they acknowledge there are going to be differences. Family and business values must be kept in mind while resolving differences. So you look to your values, as the gentleman who spoke earlier was saying, in resolving differences. Members must be committed to promoting honesty, fairness and mutual respect. Differences must be resolved quickly and face-to-face. Triangular communication should be avoided. However, third-party expert facilitation advised mediation can be used. Trust and understanding must always be promoted, either individually or in a group setting. So what they say as a family is that they have some very clear guidelines, and then they go on to say if there are differences, there's 4 steps that they have to deal with their differences. And every family will do this sort of thing slightly differently, but they've written it down, they've signed up to it, and they've accepted that this is what they're going to do in the event of conflict and differences. And therefore, when these problems happen, and it's a when, not an if, it is a lot better to have something like this in the background that you've agreed before there's an argument. If you try and write this stuff down when there is an argument, you've got no chance. So there's an illustration. Okay, let me ask you a question. I believe that there are 3 types of difficulties that arise within a family business. Personalities, business, and structural. Hands up who thinks the biggest problem is personality. You think the main person... So you think the biggest problem is personality. There's not many of you, okay. Who thinks it's business issues? No, I would agree with that. And who thinks it's structural issues? Okay, less than the others. Okay, so the majority of people feel that it's personality that causes the problems. Okay, well I'm going to disagree with you. Very simply because I absolutely passionately believe that it is the structure of the business that causes the people to behave badly. Now, I have spent 27 years, or nearly 30 years, advising family businesses, and I have been introduced to people who have been described as monsters, awkward, difficult, horrible, intransigent people. And you know what? They're all charming. They are the most delightful people. You'd be very happy to have dinner with them. You'd be very happy to make them your best friend. But they've been introduced as these terribly difficult people. Why? Because in the structure they're in, their behaviour is inconsistent with actually who they are. Let me give you an example. I had a case in Australia where a chap who was a lawyer died, and in Australia the rules he's out without a will, and he was a lawyer, which was interesting. but he did it deliberately. And the idea was that the children would get 2/3 of the estate, and the mother, the wife, would get 1/3. And she lived in a $5 million house. So within 2 weeks of the father dying, the kids came to the mother and said, "Excuse me, we'd like the $5 million, our share of the $5 million for the house, you better go." And she said, "Excuse me, this is my home, I'm not going anywhere." So she started to get angry. Now, the behaviours of both parties to each other seemed to be diabolical and bad. But that was bad behaviour driven by a structural problem. Let me give you another example. If you have two brothers who own a business, and let's say they want to give their shares in that business to their children. One brother has 2 daughters, and one brother has 2 sons. Okay? Very simple. In the next generation, the 4 cousins have 25% each of the business. So, the 2 brothers, most likely in a chauvinistic society, will be running that business. And the women will be sitting somewhere else. They'll have gone to Harvard and Columbia and decent business schools and universities, and they'll be pretty smart. So what happens is the 2 boys are running the business, and they do really, really well. And one day they sit down and they say to themselves, "You know what, we do all the work around here, and our cousins have got 50% of the business, and are not interested, and they don't care. So we think we better have a chat with them about how to deal with things." Now, that conversation is not going to be very pleasant. It's going to be a problem. It's predictable. On the other hand, the girls will sit there, and let's assume the boys are doing really badly. And they'll say, "You know what, we've got 50% of this business, and these boys, our cousins, are doing really badly. We better get rid of them." So their behaviour is going to appear difficult. So what happens is, personality changes as a result of the structure. And if you take a case, if you lock somebody in a room, turn the key, and shut the door, and lock them in there, and say, "You can never come out of here," they're going to get angry. They're going to start trying to break the door down. If, on the other hand, you leave the door and say, "Well, you can come and go as you please," they're going to relax. And that's what family businesses are all about. Because when people feel trapped in a family business, their behaviours start to deteriorate. So I believe that there is no such thing as a magic wand to fix personalities. Personalities don't change over many years, but what changes is the relationship that the people have with each other and of the business. And I hope to demonstrate that to you during the course of the next half an hour or so. That I believe structure is the key to unlocking all the problems. So what do you want to achieve in a family business? What you need are the following things. You need a balanced professional team. You need aligned leadership, one voice, and enlightened ownership. And if you can get all of those things, you've hit the jackpot, because those are the things that make it work. If you have 5 people, you've got 10 relationships. Okay, so that's going to get complicated. And in families, you often have more than 5 people. So if you have 9 people, you've got 36 relationships. And that gets complicated. And so unless you've got structures that deal with these things, nothing is going to work in the long term, because people are not going to be happy. And you have this thing called the family business paradox. You have the inevitable conflict between the word family and the word business, where the 2 things conflict. And that's a paradox. In fact, you've got 3 things. You've got family, you've got shareholders, and you've got business, because you can be in one of the 3 circles. The Americans call this the 3-circle model. If you look at the Family Business Association logo, there are 3 semicircles or circles. And why? Because that's what it means. And the point about these 3 circles, if you haven't heard this before, is that it depends which segment you're in as to what your view is going to be. And one of the problems is people have different views when they are in different segments. And that is absolutely pivotal to understanding where people are coming from and how it works. So in a family governance model, what you have to do is you have to build a model that suited your particular set of circumstances, and you would put a structure around it so that you would avoid the bad behaviours, because the bad behaviours come because of discussions between people where you think it's personality, but actually structure neutralizes it, and I'll explain that further. So for example, here is a large company. This is a very large Irish company, and they have a shareholder committee on the one in the middle, and they have a company structure on the right-hand side and a family structure on the left-hand side. And what happens is the two things live very happily in harmony with a linkage by the shareholders. And as a result of that structure, the directors are very happy because they run the business and they know what they have to do, and the shareholders are very happy. There are 67 Irish shareholders who own that business, and the turnover is over €5 billion. And the business is over 120 years old. And if you think it's difficult to get people to agree, you try and get 67 Irish people in a room together to agree what day it is. Okay, so what happens in family businesses? What are the sorts of things that happen? You get procrastination, you get amnesia, you get fear, you get conflicts of interest, you get sibling rivalry. You know, dad says to the eldest son, it's time, you know, when your time comes, you're going to be running the business. And that's when the middle son is a lot younger and hasn't proved his worth. The middle son comes along and is a genius, and the father thinks, oh dear, I'd much rather the middle son runs the business, but I've already told the eldest son that he's going to run the business. And then the third son comes along and he's even cleverer. And the father then says, well, okay, I'll stay here then, because I can't go, because I can't choose between my children. So you often get situations like that. Now what you have, in terms of conflicts of interest, you have trustees of settlements, sometimes there are trusts, sometimes there are minority shareholders, and sometimes there's a father and children relationship. There's a great story of a man in America called Stu Leonard. And Stu Leonard has a very, very big retail business. And he was fed up with his son one day because his son was driving around in a red Ferrari and not doing much work. So he called him into his office and he sat down and he put on his head a sign that said boss. And he said, son, you're fired. He took the hat off, put another hat on that said dad, and said, son, I hear you've been fired. How can I help? And that tells you the point that as a father or as a parent, you've got a very different perspective. That's a true story. The other thing about mum and dad and boss is the story of a chap who came to see me, who said to me, I own 20% of this company and my parents own 80%. I want to build the business and they're conservative and they don't want to, and we've had huge arguments. Now, they were nice people, they were not monsters, but they were very, very, very upset. So I went to see them and I said, what is the story? And they said, well, the story is that he wants to grow the business and expand it, and we don't. So I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, last time he went on an expansion activity, he lost £250,000, and we can't allow that to happen again because that's too much to lose, and we think that he'll do it again. So I said to them, well, why did he lose £250,000? And they said, well, you don't know him very well, he's an idiot. So I said, well, how do you know he's an idiot? They said, well, we're his parents. You know, we know he's an idiot. So I said, well, okay. I said, so do you think that he failed to grow the business because he's an idiot? Or could there be another reason? No, you don't understand, they said, he's an idiot. So I said, well, could it be, were you involved in the expansion plan? And they said, oh yeah, every step of the way, we were involved all the time. So I said, well, okay then, so you saw what he was doing, and yet it still went wrong. They said, yes, you don't understand how big an idiot he is. So I said, well, okay. I said, it strikes me you're not telling the truth. I said, I'm not sure that the business, that he failed because he was an idiot. Maybe, could it be that he failed because you didn't let him succeed? You didn't give him the opportunity to sink or swim. So they looked at me and said, no, you don't understand. He's just an idiot. We wouldn't do that anyway. So I said, well, look, you're not telling me the truth. What you're really saying is that this is about money, but you don't want to make it about money because money is ugly and you don't want to discuss it. Your problem is that you've got all your worth tied up in this business, and you're worried that if you let him run the business, your lifestyle as you get older will be ruined because he'll mess it up. Is that true? They said, yes. So we said, very easy. How much do you want to have in the bank that it doesn't matter that if he messes up the business? And they both wrote down on a piece of paper the same figure in about 2 seconds. So it was very easy. He bought 40% of the business from them, and they gave him the other 40%, and he borrowed the money from the bank to buy the 40% at a nice discount, but enough money to give the parents. And the theory was that he would go off and they would leave him alone. And they said, you'll see, he'll fail. And they said, well, okay, let's see. Anyway, long story short, 7 years later, he sold the business for 57 times the purchase price, became Entrepreneur of the Year in the United Kingdom, bought his parents a flat and a boat in southern Spain, and they concluded that he wasn't an idiot. So people make assumptions, and their behaviour deteriorates, but they haven't analysed what's going on. When it comes to parents and children, there's another case which is interesting. A lady, this is an English woman of 76 years old, who had a very good business in retail. And she owned 76% of the company, and her children had 4% each. And the son-in-law ran the business because she didn't trust the children particularly. And her children were suffering from what they call in the West affluenza. I don't know if you've heard of affluenza. This is about kids who've got too much money and they behave in a politically strange way. And these kids were going to the local restaurants and generally misbehaving and bringing the family's name into disrepute. And she kept telling them their behaviour was appalling and they kept arguing with her and the relationship was terrible. So we got them to a family meeting, and before the family meeting, as the family meeting started, she stood up and she said, listen, she said, I know that you all think that I'm a tyrant and I'm tyrannical, but I'm going to say that for our family meetings, we'll have an agreement that it's one arm, one vote. So everybody is equal, regardless of shares, because I want to hear your opinion. And they looked at her and they said, no, we can't. You're never going to do that. And she said, try me. And so by saying that to them, she avoided and removed a major conflictual block that was plaguing that family, because they couldn't have a dialogue because they thought that she was just in charge. So she levelled the table and said, right, everybody's got an equal say, which was very powerful. And she then walked round the table with a carrier bag with photographs of the children, with the business in the background, so they could see that as babies. So when they were dressed up as bunny rabbits as a baby, the business was still there. And all these children who were in their 30s and 40s burst out crying and realised they'd been disrespectful to their mother. And the conflict stopped straight away, just like that. No arguments, no discussion. So there are ways of expressing things non-verbally to people that enable them to move forward from a position of being entrenched and conflictual. And my point here is that there are plenty of things like that that people do in order not to have a problem. Now, the other point that you have to recognise is, in a family, people blame people. Has anybody ever heard of anybody blaming somebody for something that went wrong in a family business? Yeah, 2 hands went up there, okay. I wonder why. Okay, let me tell you. In psychological terms, there cannot, under any circumstances, be blame in a family business to a family member. Why? Well, because you have to understand that family business, if you talk to a psychiatrist, is it's called a complex system. Where a complex system is where cause and effect are not obvious, and the whole family is the system, because all actions are cause and effect. Now, what does that mean in English? I'll tell you what it means. I'll give you the best way I can describe this is an example. There was an Italian family who had a wonderful restaurant business in central London. They were the pride of the Italian community. They had the best restaurant chain. And one day they said, you know what? We should build a factory just in the suburbs, and we should make pasta and pasta sauces. And what we'll do is we'll make them centrally, and we'll put the pasta sauces on little vans, we'll whiz them into the restaurants, and we can fire all the extra chefs that we've got and deliver the food to the restaurants, so they can just serve it up and we can make more profit. It's brilliant. And then the pasta factory will sell the pasta to Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's. Fantastic idea. So what do? They say, Luigi, off you go. You go and build a factory and do it. So Luigi, he's got a degree in history. He wouldn't know a bowl of pasta if he was run over it. But never mind, it's a family business, so Luigi, off you go, go and build a factory. So Luigi builds the factory, beautiful factory, fantastic building, big celebration, the mayor opens the building, wonderful. 2 years later, they're looking at losses of £5 million. Why? What's gone wrong? Clearly went wrong. Loads of reasons why. So Luigi, he can't show his face at family meetings. He can't. He's been blamed as the black sheep in the family. Everybody hates Luigi. Luigi's wife won't let him go out for dinner with the family members. It's really sad. So we tried to get a family meeting together to try and make it to fix it. And the family said, well, we're happy to have a family meeting, but Luigi won't come because he screwed up and he did so badly. So eventually we got into a family meeting, and we did this. And this is what happened at the family meeting. And by the way, this was an Italian family where 2 brothers had married 2 sisters. So all the children were double cousins. So the warmth and the values and the empathy was fantastic. So the eldest of the brothers stood up and said, Luigi, thank you for coming to the family meeting. I would like to apologize to you because we have blamed you for the losses that were made in that factory. And we blamed you and said it was your fault. But we've thought about this, and we now realise that actually everybody who sat around this table when you were asked to go and do that job is just as guilty and responsible as you are, because we're a family. And so we can't blame you. We have to hold ourselves just as responsible as you. So there's no hard feelings. It was a collective decision, and therefore you're not responsible to take all the blame. We should share it. Each member of the family stood up, looked Luigi in the face, and apologised for being horrible to him and saying that it wasn't his fault, it was a collective responsibility. Now, if Luigi had been a hired professional manager, you could fire him and say, you screwed up, you're fired. You can't fire your family particularly, but you can discuss it with your family. And in Luigi's case, he had other qualities. But the fact is that people use blame in a family business context. And under the rules of psychology, you can't do that. Because if you're sitting at the table and you agree that a family member should go and do something and it goes wrong, it's not just him who's responsible, you've got exactly the same responsibility. So when something goes wrong in your family business, don't immediately blame somebody, blame yourself first, because that's where the blame starts. And that's why, in psychological terms, a family business is a complex system where that dynamic exists, and it's the only form of enterprise that can possibly have that psychological effect. Okay? Now, there are some conflicts and there are some conflicts, and people do very extreme things in conflictual situations. This is the story of a young woman called Sheetal Mifalao, an Indian lady who was the daughter of a very successful businessman. And she ended up running a very large Indian business called Mafalao. And what happened to her was she was suffering very badly because the rules of the family were that the women were not allowed to inherit shares. They didn't have Sharia in that community, but they have other, in the Sindhi community, for example, they have rules that the women get married and go off with their husbands and they will never have shares in the company. And this particular family had an absolute prohibition on her becoming a shareholder. But she was brilliant, she did huge amounts of good, and the shares were very valuable. So in order for her to get shares, she did a gender reassignment. You heard me, sex change. So there are some solutions to certain conflicts or issues. Well, I can't comment, but all I can tell you is it was a pretty extreme way of solving a problem. But it's true, and that's why I said truth is stranger than fiction. So if you really believe something, you know there are no limits in family businesses. Okay, so managing conflict and difficulties in a family business is often about the separation of ownership and management. You know, yes, Dad, I'll take an interest in the company. How does 50% sound? And you end up with I end up with two circles because I think it's easy to understand. that if you don't manage and look to see how you can avoid getting into the middle, you have a problem, because the friction and conflict are inevitable. How you do it, you separate things. You have shareholders to do shareholder things, you have business people to do business things. And the simplest form of structure is where you have a group board. You might have a family council, which is those people who are better able to deal with it, and you might have a family assembly consisting of the whole family. But what the family has to do is the family has to decide what role they want. And when you think about a family, you think about people who start the business and the people who add the value creators, the entrepreneurs. They are the owner-managers. The next generation are owner-managers. They want to be owner-managers. Some of them succeed and some of them don't. In the third generation, they might become owner-strategists because they don't want to get their hands dirty. They want to direct traffic. And in the fourth and fifth and sixth generation, they can become owner-investors. And if you decide that you want to be an owner-manager and you're not up to the job, you'll have a problem. If you decide you want to be an owner-strategist and you're not up to the job, you'll have a problem. But people have to decide where they want to sit at the table of a family business. And very often, you can have different people sitting in different places in order to make sure that you don't have conflict. This is an Indian company where they have a very strong structure, and they have a spiritual guru, a spiritual priest who helps the family with their discussions. And if you look at the top left-hand side, it says Family Non-Business Forum. This is for the daughters-in-law to have a facilitated session with the mother-in-law, because the mother-in-law is so difficult, or perceived to be so difficult, but with the spiritual guru, spiritual priest, and these regular 2 weekly meetings, she's become a lot less difficult. Surprise, surprise, because people are talking to her and giving her respect. So she was perceived as difficult, and it was difficult for them to work with her, but no more, because a structure was put in place to deal with it. And I think it's really important to understand that that's the issue. In this particular family, they had a case where it was father, son, 2 sons, and a son-in-law. And the father said, how can I choose between my 2 sons and my son-in-law? I'm going to have a problem. What do I do? I said to him, well, it shouldn't be your decision. So he looked at me and says, what do you mean? I own the whole business. It has to be my decision. So I said, no, you missed the point. Whoever you choose out of those 3 men, you're going to fall out with 2. Is that what you want to do? And he said, no, I don't want to fall out with anybody. So I said, well, surely what you should do is tell them that because they're going to have to live the rest of their lives working together in some form or other, you should tell them to go and find their solution themselves. And when they found their solution, you should bless it, because that's your job as father. And he looked at me and he was absolutely horrified. That's exactly what he ended up doing. And there was no difference of opinion or conflict at all. But if he had made the decision, there would have been. Okay, so what I want to do is just move forward. This is somebody that you might find in a family business. The caption reads, of course I could always stay on in a purely advisory capacity. I don't know if anyone's ever seen anybody like that in a family business. What I'd like to do is I'd like to share a little model that John Ward put together. And this is a really important one to understand the nature of the differences that exist. In this model, you have 3 types of family enterprise. You have owner-managed, sibling partnership, and cousin syndicate. And when those businesses end up in transition between one generation and the next, you end up in a sensitive situation. And what actually happens is the person who is the owner-manager, that person had a hard life building the business and only knows the planet owner-manager. Likewise, the sibling partners, the brothers and the sisters, only know what goes on the planet sibling partnership. They've never been to the planet owner-manager. And likewise, the cousin syndicate don't know what they do on the planet sibling partnership. And it's as if somebody has been playing golf all their life, and they say to their next generation, look, we'd like you to take over, take the clubs and the balls, and you play, and they're tennis players. So you have to appreciate that you will have differences of opinion because you don't know the rules of the game. And one has to understand that the rules of the game for the different people in different generations are going to be different. And if you understand that, you will have a lot less conflictual and differences of opinion. My son is joining the company. Please design a job that sounds important with no duties that could interfere with operations. That's not fair, but it happens a lot. And it's very destructive to everybody. I was talking about voting, with hands. All righty then, 51-49, I win again. You don't want ever to be in that situation because that's always a disaster. So one of the things that Harley was talking about was a constitution. And all a constitution is, it encapsulates the family's law. And you could spell it L-A-W, or you could spell it L-O-R-E, because it becomes folklore after a while. And it provides a code of conduct and a way of behaving so people know where they stand. Because again, you're solving tomorrow's predictable problems today. And you're setting expectations for people at the right level, and people then know where they stand. And this is not the way to do a family constitution, which is the way a lot of people do it. They just sweep it under the carpet. So you have to agree how to agree. This is another mean cartoon. As far as we can tell, the only thing keeping you alive is the realization that your son will inherit the business. Okay, I've got a couple of other things to say. I'm going to skip through family constitution. You'll get a copy of the slides. I just want to mention some personal issues about personal differences of opinion and conflicts that happen. These are the sorts of things that you get. How do you love all children equally, but each child is not equally talented? How do you deal with people who work harder with people who want time not to do other things? How do you have a situation where some work from the bottom up and some get attracted up the ladder? Parents live longer, smarter and healthier, and kids then are better prepared to take over earlier. So you've got constant dilemmas. And one of the ways you have to deal with that dilemma is communication. You have to be able to communicate honestly and openly with the family members around the table, because if you can't do that, it doesn't work. And so what happens is that you get different family groups arising. And this is some research done by London Business School, which shows the characteristics of families that have a very, very poor cultural weakness in their makeup. I'm not going to go through the detail of it, but you can see from a glance that there are different sorts of bad characteristics that you want to avoid. And how you deal with it is by not using I statements. And this is the last thing I want to share with you. I statements, it's where you tell people how you feel in relation to the issue, not accusing them of doing something. So an I statement starts with an I and ends up with a feeling. I feel anxious and a little scared about what will happen when we move forward, something like that, rather than, if you move forward, I don't like it. So let's take a quick scenario. You're working for your father and he dismisses an idea that you've had and tells your employee to do something in a different way. One possible path is a you statement. Dad, you make me so mad when you override my decisions. Very easy to do that. But if you look at the next alternative, another possible path is the I statement. Dad, I really felt undervalued and sabotaged when you told my employee to do things your way. I need my employees to respect me. Switching it from you to I removes the conflictual piece. And as a lesson in terms of communication, there are lots of these sorts of things that you can do in order not to have conflicts with members of your family. Too many times people use the you word. So the first statement has got blame attached to it, and we've already established that you can't blame anybody in the family business, so there's no point in using that language. And all I statements follow that sort of format. And I think that's a useful tip. Okay. So I'm just going to leave you with one little example of the Cargill family, who are one of the largest businesses in the world. And they're a family business, and they have got this stuff right. And you can just look at them to see how they do it. They've got sales of 70 billion, so they're not exactly a small family business. but they're owned by 100 family members, and basically they have a complete set of protocols, and they care for their employees, they care for their family, they have open communication, and they do everything that's on that list. And there are some really strong lessons on that list as to how you avoid having differences of opinion and conflicts. And all you have to do is look at any of the large, successful, multi-generational family businesses to see what lessons you can learn from those things. And that's just, those are the reasons why they don't have a problem. They use values. And sometimes, if you have a company and a family that have a set of values, as the gentleman we were talking before about your company, values is the key thing that enables the family businesses to hold together. And that's an example of a very large business where the values of the family and the values of the business are closely aligned together. And so my last comment is that when you see differences in a family business, you see people pointing fingers. And my thesis is that the journey from that to that is very, very short. You just have to know which buttons to press. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm sure that,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No answers, Khalid.
no,
No answers, definitely.
Arslan. I'm saying is that usually in conflicts there is usually there are two people or group of people that want the same thing. They are after the same resource. For example, Jawad Habib, instead of maybe is looking, should do something terrible.
It's okay, it's only reading yourself.
I can say it in that case. Okay, you'll get me afterward. We'll talk about succession, for example. There's a lot of members of the family who wants to become the boss. So who's going to succeed the old man? Who's going, if it's two countries competing for a territory, and so there's a conflict there. Khalid Zayani maybe is looking after that woman, and pretty woman, and everybody wants that. So here's the complex. There's conflict. There's a lot of people wanting the same thing, wanting the same resource. So how can you do it without creating too much problem? Okay, you showed us how it is to be done, but I still feel that there must be an easier way of resolving conflicts instead of the way that we do it. Like I have a problem with my father, I have my problem with my sister, I have a problem with my cousin. How do you handle that?
Well, whatever the area of conflict, the easiest way to do it is to have a process that deals with it in a neutral way. So let me give you an example. That Irish family company, they had a rule that said that there would only be one family director from each branch. One branch had a lot of people, and there were two people who wanted to be on the board. Is that the sort of example? So what they did is they appointed an appointments committee consisting of the professionals in the company with only one family member on the assessment committee. And they made the two people present themselves as if they were going to a job in a normal company. And one of them won and one of them lost. And they accepted the process. And the message there is that if you set up a fair process to deal with whatever it is, you don't have a fight. Because if the process is agreed at the beginning, people normally accept the outcome.
The Palestinian and Israelis, they've been conflicting for 5 years, 50 years, 60 years.
I think we're off the subject, Mr. Chairman.
In that case, who has what have a question? I think. Please stop.
Thank you very much, Peter. I enjoyed that presentation. Given the current downturn, have you seen conflicts increase, specifically relating to what's happening in the market in the last sort of 6 months, 9 months, or do you expect to see things, number of conflicts to increase in family businesses?
I would say the opposite. I think in hard times, one of the things that a family does is it realises that it's got an innate strength of being unified. And in times of difficulty, families tend to focus on what they have in common, not what divides them. And therefore, actually, the family businesses around the world are spending time now making sure that their processes and systems and understanding is such that they don't have conflict. So I'm seeing an opposite effect.
Thank you much, Peter. You've said a lot of examples on companies from most of European countries and in the US. And a lot of the speeches that I've been hearing on family business all around always talk about families within the European and the American system. Within the Arabic system that we have, I see it a bit more different, where, number one, what do you think the best legal structure for a family business should be? Should a family business transform into a public company, or should they stay within the family? And the second, which is really I find very, very important, and I still did not find a solution for it, within the Arab Islamic laws, how can we treat, or how can we find solutions to the Islamic Sharia inheritance that affects the family business?
Okay, well, the first question about what's the best structure, the answer is it depends. If you want to have a public company, it means that the family wants some liquidity. And once the family is a public company, shares can get sold. If the family mission is for a custodian model for the longer term, normally a trust structure is good, because it means that people don't have a share certificate that they can go and take to a bank or to a third party. So I tend to find in this part of the world and in Asia, trusts are becoming very important. Some countries like Iran don't recognize trusts, and nor does Iraq, but you can have a trust in Jordan, for example. And I think that over time, some countries' legal systems will be improved so that you can have the sort of governance that will promote the longevity of a family business. In relation to working in an Islamic context, one of the best examples I can give you, and I'm allowed to talk about, is the Habib family of Pakistan, who were originally Indians, and in 1947, on partition, they left India to go to Pakistan, and by 1970, they were the largest employer in Pakistan. They had the biggest bank, and they employed many tens of thousands of people. And the government nationalised it and took it from them with no consideration, and so they were completely wiped out. They then started again in 1980, 10 years later, and they now have a bank called Habib Bank AG in Zurich, and the balance sheet is around $9 billion, and they have 19 public companies around the world. They have a family council, they have a shareholders agreement. In fact, in London, last year in Dubai, I delivered the case study with Mr. Rafiq Habib, explaining their family structures and how they got round, how they deal with the Sharia, and how the shareholders agreement works, and how the council works. And they have a completely organised system that handles it. So it can be done. In fact, we're doing the case study again at a seminar in London in June. And Mr. Habib goes around the world now talking to large families about how to do this stuff, because he's been there, he's done it, he's got the t-shirt. And they have about 67 members of their family when they get together, and everybody knows where they stand, everybody knows what they get, everybody knows what they can do. And the Sharia is clearly there, but you can contract out of it if you want to while you're alive. So if you want to give assets to your daughters while you're alive, you can do that, as I understand it, and that's what people do.
Thank you very much. Can you just summarize and leave the challenges facing family businesses in the Gulf?
In the Gulf, I think it's to do with the fact that I've experienced something that I was introduced to some years ago. It's called